Ya Allah, Subhanallah, Ya Allah, Alhamdulillah, Ya Allah, La ilaha, Allahu Akbar, Ya Allah, Subhanallah, Ya Allah, Alhamdulillah, Ya Allah, La ilaha, Allahu Akbar.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuhu. You're welcome to another edition of today's Woman in the African Pride, and this is the part 2 of Protecting Our Orphans, the Islamic Perspective. For those of you who watched the episode before, you would realize that we spoke about this same topic, but we spoke about it in general, and I made mention that we're going to delve into the Islamic perspective and see what the Quran or Allah Almighty has to say about it, and then maybe some hadith as well. And with me still, in the studios is Mrs. Zakia Mohammed Sali. Welcome again. She is an officer of the Public Service Commission and an entrepreneur. So you're welcome to the Wahab Adam Studios of MTA Ghana. My name is Hiba Farouk. We're just going to go straight into the topic without wasting time at all. My producer doesn't give us enough time. All right. So why is the care of orphans so dear, to Islam?
Just as I mentioned in our last episode, there is great importance set in the Quran and Sunnah, which are the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be on him, in the treatment of the orphans. Right. And in one of the hadith, it is reported that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be on him, said, and I would quote it from here, that whoever caresses the head of an orphan in affection solely for the sake of Allah, a good deed will be written to his account for every hair over which he passed his hand. And this was narrated by Abu Huraira. And also in the Holy Quran, chapter 2, verse 221, it is said that, and they asked thee concerning the orphans, and that as Muslims we should say, promotion of their welfare is an act of goodness, and you intermix with them. They are your brethren, and Allah knows him who seeks to make mischief apart from him who seeks to promote the welfare of the orphans. So in essence, what the verse is telling us here is that the welfare of orphans is a good deed. Right. And then it also mentions that we should consider these orphans as our brethren. Right. We should be kind to them. We should treat them with love and affection, and we shouldn't discriminate with regards to orphans. Right. It places emphasis on the fact that Muslims are the people who have been appointed by Allah to take care of these orphans. Right. And in another saying of the Prophet, peace be on him, he said that, and I quote again, that I and the person who looks after an orphan and provides for him will be in paradise like this. And with that, he made a gesture, putting his index middle finger together, just to show how close such a person would be with the Prophet, peace be on him, in paradise. So there is a great reward in caring for orphans. Apart from the fact that you are providing them with the love and the care and the protection that they need, you are also being blessed in one way or the other by Allah. And these blessings are what I have just narrated in the hadith and the Quran. There are other several verses that talks about the rewards that comes together with orphans. But then, because of time, I think we can limit ourselves to these ones.
Brilliant. Thank you so much on that. What is the Islamic perspective regarding closed and open adoptions? By the way, what is closed and what is open adoption?
Okay, so a closed adoption is the kind of adoption whereby, and is what everybody understands as adoption. Right. It is closed in the fact that the family members, that is the birth parents of the adopted child, is not allowed to have any contact with the child whatsoever. Right. And even in some cases, there are documents that are written to the to the effect that as I am adopting this child, this child becomes mine legally.
Right.
Legally becomes mine and takes on my name.
Right.
So such a child or children wouldn't bear the name of their birth parents, but then the names of their adoptive parents.
Right.
Yes. So when it comes to Islam's perspective on this issue, Islam has stated in Holy Quran chapter. Holy Quran chapter 33, verse 5 or 6. And then it says that we shouldn't devour, or that we should call them by their names. And here it is referring to the orphans, that the orphans should be called by their names, by their father's names. And it also goes on to say that we shouldn't sever the ties of kinship. That is in chapter 7. In verse 7 of the same chapter 33. It says that we shouldn't sever ties of kinship, and with this it means that we shouldn't make it closed. We shouldn't take the child away from their blood,
their lineage.
Exactly. Yes, and then we should call them by the names of their fathers. So in relation to closed and open adoption, from these verses it is very clear that Islam is completely against the closed type of adoption. It rather encourages the open adoption. But then this doesn't mean that Islam is against taking care of children who are not biologically ours. In fact, it encourages it. And just as we mentioned earlier on, there are blessings that are attached to one who takes care of even someone who is not your biological child. The reason why some Muslims believe that even adoption as a whole is not Islamic is the fact that, it is usually associated with the closed type of adoption. That is what we all know. People go to orphanages, take children, and that it is. They do not trace to know who their birth parents are, and they take the names of their adopted parents. So in essence, closed adoption is a no to Islam. It encourages open adoption. And then there was even a revelation that came later on, because the Holy Prophet Muhammad, peace be on him, himself was taken care of by his grandfather, and then his paternal uncle. And then later on, when he became an adult, he even adopted Zaid, who was one of the freed slaves. He adopted Zaid as his son. So initially, before this verse, who wasn't a relative. So during the pre-Islamic times, when you adopt a child, the people in the community would call you by the name of your adopted parents. So Zaid at the time was called Zaid bin Muhammad. But then the revelation came in chapter 33, which said that we should call them by the names of their fathers. So when the revelation came, he changed Zaid's name. Zaid no longer took on his name as Zaid bin Muhammad, but then Zaid's father's name. And there's even an example just to prove to people that this is what the revelation says. When Zaid married, he got divorced. And there's a revelation in the Holy Quran which says that you cannot marry the wives of your sons. But then when Zaid got divorced, in order to protect Zaid's wife, he, the Prophet, peace be on him, married Zaid's wife. So there are discriminations in certain quarters that accusing the Prophet of marrying the wife of his son. But then he did this just to prove that it is not the case. Zaid is not my adopted son, so legally he cannot inherit from me, and we don't belong to the same lineage. So this is why, in the life of the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, this was one of the reasons why he had several wives, and by several, it wasn't more than 4 at a time. But then he married women just to protect the orphans. Some of them had orphan children. The Muslim men who went to war and lost their lives. Some of them had children, so he would marry them into the family just to protect the orphans.
I like that aspect of polygamy. I've got a question in that line, but before we go there, you made mention of Zaid and talking about how he could not inherit, his father, the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So then it brings me to the question: so orphans do not get to inherit from their adopted, parents. Is that correct?
Yes.
I see.
Yes, it's correct, because legally, just as we discussed earlier on, they are not your blood relatives.
Right.
And the provisions in the Holy Quran provides for your property to be shared amongst your biological children and family members.
Right.
But in this case, Islam stresses that we shouldn't sever ties of kinship. So if and this is one of the very important reasons why it is saying that we shouldn't sever ties of kinship, because if the adopted child, if the father has some property, it is his right to inherit that property from the father. But then once the ties are severed, then it takes it away from them.
Right.
So it is in Islam, it is not right that an adopted child would inherit the adopted father's property.
Right.
However, there's a provision in the verse, I don't have it with me, but there's a verse in the Holy Quran, we can go and Google, which talks about orphans and all of that. It says that although they are not entitled to your property, but then when you are sharing property, then you should leave a part of your property to them. So it is not saying that you should leave them with nothing. It is your property and you can give it out. Even someone who is not a biological child, you have the right to give your property to anyone that you want to. But then legally, in the sharing of property, when probably you are not present at that time, the child doesn't, or the child cannot claim any part of your property. That is why it is important. And that verse came that we should still leave a part of our property to them. So in this case, it's not like you are leaving them with nothing. You are still giving them something.
Okay. In an instance where the adopted parents that do not have children of their own, and we know in Islam, in the sharing of properties, other family members, take up that. And unfortunately, the adopted parent wasn't able to, provide before passing. Is there a provision for, that caters? Because they to an extent become the sole, have always been the sole protectors of this orphan. Is there any sort of provision that takes care of?
There is a provision, because, in talking about properties, when you don't have children, but you have other family members, you have your brothers, you have your sisters, you have your mothers, and in the Holy Quran, there are provisions for all these people. So even if you're alive and in the sharing of your property, they have your sisters, your brothers, your family members, your close family members, they also have a right, they have a portion, they are entitled to your property. Right. So if you don't have children at all, but then you have family members whom you can give your property to.
Right. That's very interesting. Very, very interesting. I'm sure a lot of people did not know, the technicalities that comes with, especially with the severing of, kin. Yeah. It's important that it's interesting because in the orphanages, personally, I tend to forget that these children probably have extended family. I just see them as orphans. Their mother, their father is no more, so they're just alone. But then obviously they have, family, which a lot of people do not, consider in adopting them. So that's very, very interesting. In an ideal Islamic setting, are orphanages or foster homes, is it permitted to have them?
It's for orphanages, I would say that it is a big no, because not to say that Islam forbids orphanages, but it doesn't encourage it, and it doesn't encourage it based on the provisions based on in the Holy Quran, and then the sayings of the Holy Prophet and all of that, because we know that Islam wants the best for children. And the best here means that they should be in an ideal family home where there is a mother to take care of them, where there's a father, where there are siblings. You remember I mentioned earlier on that those rights that they have, even after they are being orphaned, they are still entitled to those rights. And those rights doesn't include being in an institution, because an orphanage is an institution. And so when we're talking of orphanages and fostering and all of that, Islam rather encourages fostering. Fostering is where you take a child into your family, yes, and provides the child with all the needs, that you would provide your own children.
Right.
But then in an institution, the child wouldn't be able to enjoy these rights. And so it is not alien. In Islam, we've had instances, just as I mentioned earlier on, the Holy Prophet Muhammad, peace be on him, himself, he benefited from the care of his grandfather and his uncle.
And even a foster mother.
Exactly. Fine. Even a foster mother. In the case of Moses, for instance, when he was placed in the river Nile in a basket, he was being fostered in a home by the Pharaoh's wife. Yes. And even let's talk of even Mary, mother of Jesus. You know, she was placed in the care of her own uncle, Zachariah. So fostering is not alien. Fostering and adoption, and by adoption here I mean the open adoption, it is not alien in Islam. And so ideally, a child should rather be fostered. So there's a system in Islam which is called, I might be wrong, maybe kafala, which literally means adoption or sponsoring. So Islam encourages sponsoring and fostering of the child rather than, being placed in an orphanage. And that is why in many Islamic countries you hardly hear of orphanages. It's because it is strongly discouraged.
Okay. So moving on to polygamy, I've got a very personal question I would like to ask. More of a suggestion. More of a suggestion. I'm sure the men out there won't be happy with this because they do not like the female take of polygamy. But is polygamy a legitimate way of protecting orphans?
Yes, it is. And I would just like to quote from the Holy Quran. In the Holy Quran, chapter 4, verse 4, there is a provision there which makes it legitimate. And I would quote, it says that if you fear that you will not be just in dealing with the orphans, then marry of other women as may be agreeable to you. So here, permission is granted in connection with the taking care of orphans. That makes it legitimate when it comes to, I know they are, someone might not agree with me, but then because we are talking of orphans, we are concentrating here, we are concentrating on orphans. There are other conditions which allows a man to marry more than one, but then in this case, permission is given concerning the taking care of orphans. And there are certain circumstances that necessitates a man to marry women who have orphaned children.
And widowed women.
Yeah, widowed women, and then probably sometimes the children who do not even have, they are orphans, children whose birth parents cannot be traced. There's this stigma attached to orphans. The status alone of being an orphan is something that destroys the orphan. Their self-esteem is affected and all of that. So in such an instance, a man can marry the mothers of such children to give them that protection, because now that status is taken away. They are no longer orphans because now they have a father, they have a legal guardian who is taking care of them. And also, sometimes when you adopt children, the biological children becomes jealous of them. Probably they are excelling more than them in certain areas. They might feel the father is giving too much to this orphan who came from nowhere and all of that. So in order to address all these issues, a man can marry more than one. Wives of widowed can marry widowed women. And just as I mentioned earlier, an example is the time of the Holy Prophet Muhammad, when Muslim men went to war and then died in war. They were left with widows, with children, and all of that. So as a source of protecting these people, it's important that you marry the women and give them the protection and the love and the care that they need. So yes, Islam allows polygamy as a way of caring for orphans.
Okay. So now to my suggestion. I don't know if I should direct this to men, but maybe it's not my place, as I am, I am not in a place to be able to marry extra, but it is advisable that you marry for, more profitable, reasons, like, marrying to take children under your care, or marrying like a widowed woman, as opposed to other personal reasons of marriage, if you understand. So please, let the ladies in the society or the women in the society, that goes to say the aunties of, men who are capable of, taking other children or other, bereaved families under their care, to encourage that there are lots of these, such families, that have lost, the breadwinner of the family. There are lots of them in the society. Please encourage that, okay? So to my next question, what are the principles of care regarding the orphan that, so what are the principles of care regarding orphans that are mentioned, in the Holy Quran?
There are lots of verses actually, and it is all talking about one thing. It is talking about they being our brethren. For instance, in Holy Quran chapter 2, verse 221, Allah tells us to consider orphans as our brothers.
Right.
In another chapter, Quran chapter 2, verse 84, it is talking about love and kindness in their upbringing.
Right.
Just as you would provide love, just as you would be kind to your own children, in the same way you have to be kind to the orphan children as well. And we are asked not to oppress them, and that we should treat them equitably, and also, the Holy Quran enjoins the feeding of the poor. In chapter 90, verses 13 to 16, it talks about all of these things. So basically, it's all talking about their care, because these children are considered as vulnerable. So as Muslims, we need to treat them equitably. We shouldn't oppress them. We should be kind to them. We should feed them. And then it goes along to say that it is our duty to take care of them, as it is their right to be taken care of. Yeah,
very well put. So to wrap up, we've come to the end of this very interesting, topic about protecting orphans. We spoke of, inheritances of, orphans inheriting the adopted, parents' property. Let's talk about the protection of the orphans, property themselves, what they have inherited from their biological, parents that are no more.
Okay, so with regards to the property of the orphans, the Holy Quran tells us in chapter 4, verse 3, that we shouldn't devour the properties of orphans. It means we shouldn't take their orphans away from them. What their parents have left for them, we shouldn't take it away from them. It goes further to say that once, and especially those who already have properties, we shouldn't mix the orphans' properties with ours. We shouldn't mix their properties with ours. In some cases, it might be permissible to spend some of it, especially in the interest of their child, probably with education, or it could be a health problem or what have you. But then it has to be in relation to the care of the orphan. In such a case, it is allowed. Otherwise, if you have the means, then you should take care of the orphans and just leave the orphans and property safely until, and it says in verse 7 that we should test their understanding and make sure that we give the properties back to them when they have reached the age of maturity. In the case of girls, when they've reached a marriageable age, and that could be described as an age of maturity. So when you feel that as a parent, they have become responsible, they have become matured and can take care of that property, you should give the property out to them. And it also stresses in this case that in the process of giving the property out, you should make sure that there's a witness. There should be someone present to witness that you are actually giving the right amount of property that the orphan inherited back to the orphan.
So to encourage transparency.
Yes, to encourage transparency. And then it further warns that those who devour the property of orphans unjustly, they only swallow fire into their bellies, and they shall burn in a blazing fire. So it is warning as Muslims that woe unto you who devours the property of the orphan. There is a consequence when you don't heed to the Quran's directive and you go on to misappropriate or spend the property of the orphan extravagantly. And just as we spoke earlier, for those whose deceased parents didn't leave any property to them, you can leave a portion of your property. Yes, although they are not entitled to it, but then as a loving father, as the one who is protecting the child, when it comes to the sharing of your property, you should leave a part of your property to them. Yeah. So in essence, the property of the orphan belongs to the orphan.
This is very, I feel like, I believe that this is very, good, because if not for these kind of injunctions, well, even with the existence of the injunction, it still happens, but then you have people that take up, the responsibility of, certain orphans or widowed, bereaved families solely because of how much they've inherited, and to be able to get access to that amount of property or money or whatever, and which is wrong. At the end of the day, cheating the true owners of this the property, cheating them, and that is completely unfair, as if life hasn't been tough enough. This has been a very interesting topic. We've tackled very, sensitive, parts of it. We've, delved into the Islamic, perspective on it. We've been speaking about the protection of orphans. If you just tuned in, unfortunately, we're wrapping up the show. We've spoken about what Allah has to say. Allah is completely against, getting into or trying to take properties of the orphans, which is the properties that their parents, their late parents left for them. And Allah encourages fervently that you help take care of, you help sponsor, orphans, and take them under your care if you can. Also, Mrs. Zakia made mention of the fact that you can adopt, and Islam isn't, Islam doesn't encourage, close adoption, which is, scraping the name of and the identity, their original identity of, the child or the orphan. But you should, take up this responsibility, at the same time keeping the name of the child and making sure that the child knows where they come from and they are aware of their identity and where they belong. A lot of other, parts of this topic were touched very, thoroughly. And if you just joined in, I'm sorry for you. If you just joined in, there is it is on YouTube, so you can quickly rush to YouTube and play it back, and then you get all the information you need. And hopefully it touches your heart to reach out to an orphaned family or, a bereaved family and lend, a hand to them, and Allah would richly bless you. My name is Hiba Farouk. I've been doing this with Mrs. Zakia Mohammed Sali. We've been speaking about protecting orphans. This has been today's Woman, the African Pride. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.
And there is no God beside him, the knower of the unseen and the seen. He is the gracious and the merciful God. Oh Allah, you are most great. He is Allah, and there is no God beside him, the knower of the unseen and the seen. He is the gracious and the merciful God. Oh Allah, you are most great. Oh Allah, you are holy. Oh Allah, we praise you. Oh Allah, there is no God, you are most great. Oh Allah.